Moving to the third condition, vomiting. Vomiting again is a physiological mechanism that is mediated by many factors, guys. You need to be very clear about the centers, the brain centers controlling the action of vomiting. And if you are clear about the brain centers, you can easily understand what are all the triggers for these brain centers and how does that ultimately ends up in vomiting. Alright, at the outset, I want you to be familiar about two structures, guys. Two structures. First thing is going to be area postrema, also called as chemoreceptor triggering zone, abbreviated as CTZ. Chemoreceptor triggering zone, CTZ. Alright, that's structure number one, located in brainstem. And number two, it's going to be brainstem vomiting center, and this is again a very important center when it comes to vomiting, because even when area postrema, also called as chemoreceptor triggering zone, gets activated, the effect of activation is ultimately activating brainstem vomiting centers, and through which vomiting is being manifest. So these two regions are something you should be very thorough, and you can't afford to forget these two centers. Just two, easy to remember. Number one, area postrema, also called as chemoreceptor triggering zone, and number two, brainstem vomiting center, doctors. Alright, now when it comes to this area postrema, you need to be aware of this structure, area postrema, which is also called as chemoreceptor triggering zone. This is a region which is not covered by blood-brain barrier. You guys know this. Every structure of brain is covered by blood-brain barrier, astrocytes. So the brain parenchyma is completely staying away from blood, from cerebrospinal fluid. For any other structures you consider, brain is completely protected by these external substances by astrocytes. There are few regions where the astrocytes are absent and the neurons are going to be directly in touch and influenced by certain factors and certain chemicals. Those regions are regions which are not covered by blood-brain barrier, and one such region, doctors, is what is called as area postrema. I repeat, this region is not covered by blood-brain barrier. So they are open to be influenced by any kind of chemical factors or other stimuli, guys. That's area postrema. And the first point you are going to study when it comes to vomiting is going to be the factors that influences chemoreceptor triggering zone. The name itself tells you it's chemoreceptor triggering zone, which means many chemicals will trigger this structure, and from that structure there is going to be emesis happening. Number one, it's going to be drugs. Examples are opioids as well as cancer chemotherapy drugs. Number two, certain hormones, especially hormones of pregnancy, do have this effect. So any kind of chemical, if the chemical is noxious and if the subject is kind of sensitive to that chemical is going to stimulate chemoreceptor triggering zone, and obviously there is going to be action of vomiting, because once chemoreceptor triggering zone is getting activated, it in turn activates brainstem vomiting center. Number one. Number two, apart from these chemicals, the chemoreceptor triggering zone is also activated by vagus nerve, and this vagus nerve which activates chemoreceptor triggering zone comes from gastric mucosa. So any kind of irritants or any kind of inflammations, irritation and inflammation in the gastric mucosa is mediated by vagus nerve, and that's going to trigger chemoreceptor triggering zone, leading to vomiting.